Good evening and welcome to the March 27th, 2023 meeting of the Planning Board of the Town of Chatham. My name is Catherine Helper and I'm Chair of the Planning Board of the Town of Chatham. And this meeting is being conducted in a hybrid format that is both in person and with remote connection. And I'll read you a few points about that in a moment. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be available shortly hereafter for scheduled and on-demand viewing on any smartphone or tablet device. If anyone is recording the meeting, can you please notify us? I'll give you a few seconds in case you're connected remotely. I don't see any hands raised, so we'll go ahead. So this meeting of the Chatham Planning Board is being conducted both in person and via remote participation in accordance with Section 20 of Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 and shall afford adequate alternative means of public access using Microsoft Teams or by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410. That's 508-945-4410. And the conference ID number is 319-070-426#. That's 319-070-426#. Or as I mentioned, you can join the meeting online using Microsoft Teams through the link that is in the agenda that's posted on the town website. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access, and as I mentioned, we will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. In accordance with town policy, the public can speak to any issue or business item on the agenda during the meeting when recognized by the chair. So let's start with a roll call of planning board members. Bob Wirtschafter.
Bob Wirtschafter, present.
Art Spru.
Art Spru, present.
Charlene Greenhalgh.
Charlene Greenhalgh, here.
Bob Dubus.
Bob Dubus, present.
And Megan Story was here. She has stepped out for a moment, and we are expecting Warren Chain, but he has not arrived yet. So we'll go ahead. First item on our agenda is the minutes from the March 13th, 2023 meetings. Any additions, corrections? Yes, Art.
On page 2,
Yes.
second line in a comment after subject property is INS. I believe it should be as. Does that make sense?
Where are you? Oh, yes, as.
Should be
So
as.
typo. Yes.
Just a typo, I guess.
Yeah. So second line of the first paragraph on the second page.
Right.
Yes.
That's all I saw.
All right. Any other corrections or amendments to the minutes? If not, may I have a motion to approve the minutes as drafted with the correction that Arthur's pointed out?
Art Spru, I'll make that motion.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Bob Wirtschafter,
Bob Wirtschafter, approve.
Art Spru,
Art Spru, approve.
Megan Story,
Megan Story, approve.
Charlene Greenhalgh,
Charlene Greenhalgh, approve.
Bob Dubus.
Bob Dubus approves.
Thank you. So minutes for March 13th are approved with one small correction. Next item on our agenda is we do have a working session for the planning board for long-range planning. We will be discussing the West Chatham Neighborhood Center draft zoning bylaw amendments. And this is a planning board working session, so we will limit the discussion to the planning board, but there will be an opportunity for public comment following the planning board working session. So I'm actually going to ask our principal planner, Ryan Christenberry, to start us off on some of the points that she's brought out that are still under consideration.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So for tonight, I thought we'd just jump right back into where we were on February 27th prior to the public hearing and review the staff memo that was intended for discussion that night. So in your packets tonight, there are two staff memos. Am I getting some feedback? Yeah. There are two staff memos, one dated February 21st, which is where I thought we could start, and then jump to the March 22nd staff memo. So leading up to the scheduled public hearing, there were 4 items of general discussion that the board had requested some additional staff information on, and some suggested language to remedy some of the concerns that you had. And those 4 areas were year-round rentals, the RPZ, prohibitions on single-family dwellings in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center District, and affordable and attainable housing. And what I tried to lay out for you is just some discussion points around each of those. The board had concerns about there not being a year-round rental requirement in the district. So staff suggested that one remedy for that would be including language as a special condition that requires a 181-day minimum stay within the district. That was a planning board member suggestion. Staff thought that made good sense and offered that as a solution to that concern. And we can discuss these as we go, or I can talk through them and then we can circle back to each one individually, whichever your preference.
Why don't we go one by one,
Okay.
if that's all right with you? Yeah. So why don't we discuss this point? So we'll go one by one. Sorry about that. I had the mic off. And why don't we give any comments or suggestions about the year-round rental requirements? How do you feel about what staff has suggested and what has been done?
And I should just further clarify, these would be specifically for multifamily dwellings and conversions of existing dwellings to multifamily dwellings. Those are 2 separate and distinct uses identified within the district. And rather those being permitted by right, they would be elevated to a special condition by which you could impose as a condition of those permits that a minimum 181-day rental period is required. So that gets away from the concern that though any units permitted there that either are rental or condominium would become short-term rentals.
Bob Wertschafter is wanting to speak.
Yeah, I just want a clarification that any existing permitted homes don't have that restriction.
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay. Other Megan?
So existing permitted homes would still be allowed short-term rental. So like, I live in this district, I rent in, not me, this is an example. Live in the district, rent in the summer, I can continue to do that.
If you have, so we don't have a rental
I know,
regulation.
this is, yeah.
But if you are participating in the rental registration program,
But if you're not, and you don't get in before this, you can no longer rent in the summer.
I don't, so we're not defining short-term rentals
Okay.
here.
My concern is that if somebody currently lives in that district and we impose this, have we then cut off the ability for them to rent in the summer, which would change the value of their home? In my opinion.
If I might, and
Yes,
I'm
Charlene.
glad you actually made it specific too, this would only count for multifamily.
Yeah.
So whether it's existing or conversion, so somebody who owns a single-family home, if there's a 2-family dwelling, it can still be rented seasonally if it has in the past. Some people, if they do have a house in a, small apartment, may move to the apartment during the summer, rent their main home, part of the home out to help with bills and things like that. That, as I understand it, would still be permitted.
Okay, that was actually what I was thinking of for an example, so thank you.
Okay.
And thank you for calling that out. We include the language for new multifamily and
Yes.
new conversions.
Yes, okay. Other comments about this provision? Arthur?
So I'm always concerned about what you can and can't do when you put conditions on and that. Do you see any, I like it the way you have it. Do you see any issues with us if we're put a special condition demarcation for these designated uses, that we could put a 181-day lease term condition on them without any pushback or?
We haven't proposed this to council yet. Special
Okay.
condition uses are a bit of a nuanced tool
Yeah.
for the Chatham Planning Board. So it doesn't rise to the level of a special permit.
Right.
So there may be some legal circumstances around that, which we can discuss with council.
Yeah. And, you know, if there is an issue associated with that, if you elevate it to a special permit, would that allow you to do this? So I'm just leaving that open up as part of a discussion with town council associated with that. Because I think we need to allow the board to do something associated with this issue so that we don't run into the short-term rental piece until all of that is resolved on a larger scale. That's it.
Yeah, okay. Charlene?
Just to kind of, I think we're understanding each other. So this would be one of the requirements for a special condition for you to be able to have a multifamily home or multifamily development. So that would be automatically in there, and you'd probably want to incorporate any of the conditions in the decision
Right.
for belt and suspenders.
Right, yeah, so a special condition provision would require the site plan review and then, your typical standards therein, and then any special other conditions that are identified elsewhere in the bylaw as part of that decision.
Right, good, yeah. Other comments about this? Do we think it addresses all of the possibilities to avoid unintended consequences of implementing this zoning? I'm always a little bit almost afraid because we keep talking in a way that, well, there's someone who lives there full year-round, and then they want to rent to earn extra income. I'm more concerned about the real estate developers in Singapore who will come in and buy and might, not that there's anything wrong with this, but it may not be what our intentions are for West Chatham. May buy up the property and may use the density for purposes that are not part of what our intentions are for West Chatham, or may build multifamily. And I just want to make sure that we have enough protection in place so that we don't experience unintended consequences for the allowances that we're giving in this zoning. Charlene, did you have a comment about that?
I was just going to say, I think that's where the inclusionary zoning
Yeah.
will help with that. I mean, I've been writing zoning
For a
for
long time.
a very, very long time, longer
I
than I
know.
want to admit. And, there is no perfect,
Yeah,
absolute zoning bylaw. If somebody can find it out there, please show me. But,
Yeah, I understand.
somebody's always going to find something, that little or whatever to try and get around something. And that's why I've had, in my prior life, had boards. One board would be like, oh, there's too many requirements, and another would be like, there's not enough.
Right.
In my opinion, you can actually not have too many, because I think it makes it
Right.
easier for the person developing something to know what they can and can't do. There's
Yeah.
no, well, what about this? Or what about, if you can put as many requirements in and conditions of what you can build and how you can build it, then the developer knows what direction to go,
yeah. Yeah, that's,
more often than not.
yeah. I would tend to agree with you that the more we can specify, because we have very clear intentions and purposes for this bylaw for West Chatham to meet the needs of the town. We have I'm just trying to do exactly what you're suggesting, Charlene, to be sure that we have whatever we need in this bylaw to avoid unintended consequences and to really make sure that our intentions and purposes are fulfilled. Yeah,
This is probably a stupid question, but since I am relatively new, why 181 days? Why not longer. And the reason
Yeah.
I'm asking is because in my
Good question.
mind, I'm thinking, that's only April to September. You're still talking prime. Like, if I were gonna be renting on Nantucket, it wouldn't be unusual for me to rent for 6 months.
So that's the residency requirement. If you're here for 181 days, you're a resident of the town that you reside in, I believe is the reasoning for that.
But,
Bob, yeah.
and this plays into what I was gonna say. There's a difference between a rental requirement and an occupation requirement.
Yes, right.
And we do not have anything here that says I have to rent it for 6 months and a day. I don't have to be there for 6 months and a
Right.
day. So, I'm not sure we can get an occupancy requirement into this, but it doesn't stop somebody from, I see no reason why year-long leases aren't, the requirement of 6 months and a day is for occupancy. This is a lease for rental, so why shouldn't it be a year lease?
Yeah, I'd agree. Megan?
That was what I was getting at. And while I understand the occupancy law, I will say that there are not a lot of teeth to that law from what I can see. So that being said, I think that I would lean more toward like a 365, or even 9 months. I mean, at least you're getting, I don't want to trap people in leases that they don't want to be in. So, I mean, I understand that. But a year is a pretty standard term, and it seems
Yeah.
to me you'd get a full occupancy out of it, as opposed to like, if you have money to burn, if you're here to be here for a week here and a week there, 6 months is not, I don't think is enough of a deterrent.
I think the challenge lies with the zoning enforcement officer and their ability to enforce leases and occupancy, right? That's different than just having a property owner demonstrate that they're a resident, right? I mean, a gas bill can show that you're a resident, but enforcing leases can be,
But if I have to pay as someone for a year, I'm less likely to do that than I am for 6 months. If I can get 6 months of a lease that lives from April to September, and I'm gonna come June, July, and August, a couple weeks in September, I can come it's worth it for me, thinking as the wealthy person that I clearly am. But if I have to pay for a full year, it's not worth it. That's a lot more money. Like, that's all. I think there's a risk.
Charlene, yes.
I think this might be a good question for town council. I honestly don't know if you can restrict non-affordable rentals to annual leases. If it's an affordable rental, big A affordable, so that it counts towards, our 10%, or even if it's workforce housing affordable, that has to have a year-round requirement. That's just the nature of those. So,
Right, yeah.
but it might be a good question for council, a market rate rental, can you restrict it? I think you can restrict it to at least, the 181 days. But I don't know if you can restrict to a year, and I think that's something we need input from council on.
yeah.
I think that was essentially what we did with the ADUs, though. We did put a 12-month lease requirement on them that is enforceable. So we did do that with the ADU bylaw.
That's a town-wide restriction, and maybe there's some,
Townwide, and there was a smaller volume of ADUs anticipated than I think what you're talking about here in terms of the number of units.
And it's a different beast, should I say.
Yeah, it is a
totally
different beast.
type of
Yeah.
creation of housing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and the deed restriction is the mechanism for requiring year-round, or having year-round requirements under the affordables, but we can't deed restrict market rate properties.
Right.
So I don't know what another tool might be, so it's a good question for council.
Yeah, Bob.
I know at least in Portland, Oregon, there is no subleasing permitted in the whole town, in the whole city. Is that, I mean, is there some way we can put a no subleasing provision into these as well?
Yeah, is that, again, referred to as another second type of special condition criteria? I mean, both go hand in hand, really, right? I mean, just because you have a lease doesn't mean you can't sublease, right?
Or de facto, you know? Well, you can go there for 4 weeks. I'm not gonna charge you, but that other payment you're giving me for something else is.
Okay. So we have a few questions for council on this one. And I'm hearing from the board that we're favoring longer than 181-day minimum if we can find a proper legal means to do that. Correct? Is that correct? That's what everyone's thinking? Okay, good. Any other discussion on this point? Yes, Mr. Dubus.
I don't want to run a stick in the mud here, but in some instances, subleasing is not a bad thing, okay? I have no pros and cons about either one, but why if somebody had to leave for 2 or 3 months and the owner of the building or the owner of the property, you asked them and they said, look, you're going away and I know it's tough on you. Maybe we could work a sublease out for the 2 or 3 months you're gone. I'm just throwing that out there because I don't expect it to happen very often, but there is certain circumstances that could come arise that, okay, I can't afford this now because I have to go and I have to put out my rent money in another city for a while because I've got a sick aunt or I've got a brother or who knows.
Because I can't find a job on Cape Cod.
Okay? So I need to leave for 3 months. Okay? If my landlord said, I understand where you're coming from. You have a nice guy and to take it over for 3 months. He's hanging around. He wants something that, he wants to move out of the house or something for 3 months. I know a friend of mine, the kids, they're 30. They get together, and for the winter, they'll get a winter rental. And they live out of the house for the winter, and then in the summertime, they move back in with their parents, which is okay, I guess. But that's all I'm throwing out there.
Okay, Arthur, yes.
Well, I think this has to do with the short-term rental more than subleasing. My concern is if somebody's gonna go out there and rent it by the week, that's gonna fall into that short-term rental. So what's the criteria for subleasing? Every one of these things, you have to drill down into them because there's consequences, whether you do it one way versus another way. So I think all of those have to be resolved if you're gonna go ahead with something like this.
And I'm talking
Yep.
a long-term sublease.
And I know exactly what you're talking about, and I think that that's perfectly fine. But it doesn't preclude a short-term rental.
Well, then maybe we should have something
That's
in
exactly.
that aspect.
Yes.
Can it be sublet? Yes. Minimum 2 months or minimum 3 months,
Which just happened.
That's what I'm
Just
just.
happened to be June, July, and August. I mean, I'm just trying to,
Yes, Bob.
No, the sublease would be at the same rate, and, so I'm throwing it out there to hear all these answers, so obviously, it doesn't seem like it's a very good idea. It would have to be a certain circumstance to make it work.
With the subleasing, you mean? Yeah.
Oh, and obviously, you can find the holes in it already, so let's just drop it. I just wanted to bring it up to see what you would say.
Yeah. Any other comments from anyone about this issue before we move on to the next points that Ryan's put forth? The next point is about the RPZ footnote language. does anyone, do you have any issues with some of those points? Yeah, Arthur?
Yes, I did some research on this, and
Okay.
I found the corrective item that I picked up on.
Okay,
In two locations. One was with the separate article for the R20 district amendment, and it's the same one on the footnotes that are within the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. They refer to, and they say here, as shown on, quote, airport layout plan update dated April 2020, the RPZ. Okay, I went through all the plans, and the RPZ is shown there, but there's no definition of what it actually is. There's no dimension or anything. The place I did locate that was in the airport master plan. So I think if we just change the language, and this is something like this, as shown in, this is the replacement language, in the airport master plan update dated February 2021, figure 2-4, runway protection zone dimensions dash runway 6-24. That's the figure. And that figure, which looks like that, that has all the dimensions, and it would lock it in to what that is.
Great.
So this was, I think it was raised in an email to us by several other people, and I think this is a valid point to change. If you make the change in both locations, at least we've locked it down then. So
great,
I'll pass this on to you later on.
Thank you.
great. Any other? Great, thank you, Arthur. That really makes it much better. Any other comments on the footnotes for the RPZ? I think we've kind of gone through that pretty thoroughly. So, great. So let's move on to the next point from Ryan, that Ryan summarized for us on her February 21st memo, and that's about the prohibition on single-family dwellings. We did hear from a couple of people a response. I think Mr. Kokolas and a couple of people on the select board mentioned that they wondered why we were not including single-family dwellings in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. So we might just want to revisit this and take a look. And I'll start off and throw out a couple of ideas. I think the reason, as I recall, the reason that there are some existing single-family dwellings in West Chatham, but we thought not to include the ability to build new single-family dwellings. And I think, as I remember, what our logic was is that most of Chatham is zoned single-family residential. And what we want to do in the neighborhood centers, and what the comprehensive plan urges us to do, is to provide something different, to provide different options for housing. And those options are really very much needed now. Smaller units, apartments on top of commercial uses. We want mixed use and multifamily. So we want that in the neighborhood centers. The idea did come up, and we looked at it a bit, and we might want to refine our looking, is to have these transitional zones towards the east of the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. We were also thinking on the north, where this would be a different zoning area, and we'd have to craft different zoning for it, but these could be areas where we could allow for greater density of residential zoning. We would not include the commercial or mixed-use piece that we're including in we could call it the West Chatham Neighborhood Center proper. But there'd be these transitional zones where we would specifically allow for smaller lot sizes and smaller single-family dwellings, greater density, but smaller single-family dwellings, and that might be a way to address this concern and address it nicely. It's also aesthetically very pleasing, and could work out well. So I'm just throwing that idea out. Megan, yeah.
I love that idea. I love exactly what you said. A good example of it, I think, is the Habitat housing that is
Yeah,
right
right,
there.
exactly,
I mean, it's
yes.
literally right there for everyone to see what that would look like.
Right.
And in my opinion, it's perfect for the neighborhood center. So, I mean, I probably would have made it even more dense, but what do I know?
Yeah.
But you know, that type of thing would be fantastic, so I like
Right.
that.
Right. Other comments? And I think Bob Dubus also brought up the idea about extending West Chatham more towards the east. And I think in that discussion, we came up with this idea of maybe rather than extending West Chatham Neighborhood Center proper too much towards the east, that we'd have this, create a new zone, a transitional zone where we allow for greater density of residential, but not the commercial piece. So anyway, that's an idea. And that but I want to hear from the board members. It would mean that we would keep our not allowing single-family dwellings in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center proper, we could call it, and then create these sort of wings or transitional areas where we would allow smaller single-family homes. And another idea that I'll just throw out to you that could go along with that is we could try to locate other areas in town that would be suitable for smaller lots and smaller single-family homes so that we could address that need in another way, in other areas. So Warren, yes, you want to make a comment or no? Yes, go ahead, please.
Always able to make comment.
Okay.
Before we extended or made the neighborhood center larger, especially to the east, our discussion pretty well said we don't want single-family houses in the West
Right.
Chatham Neighborhood Center. As we've made it bigger and bigger, I think my resistance to single-family homes is less, but at the same time, I feel that if we have a prohibition in place, there already are a large number of single-family homes, that the town-owned property that's going to be developed is likely to have single-family homes on it. Therefore, and redevelopment of those properties will permit single-family homes. So I think that even if there's an absolute prohibition in our bylaw, there's still going to be a large number of single-family homes in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. So I still come down in favor of not permitting the development, including single-family homes, that would be after the effective date of our zoning bylaw, because the entire intent, as you had said, Madam Chairman, was really to provide a significant block or the opportunity to develop a growing block of housing, which was not the typical Chatham single-family zoning or single-family homes. And that the idea of having multifamily, multi-use, also does permit greater density than any configuration of single-family homes. And a part of our exercise here is try to increase the density, not to the maximum possible by any means, but our 8 to 12 units per acre is less achievable if you're in a multi-use environment with parking lots and commercial and everything else. If you start sticking single-family homes in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center, the density is going to drop like a rock, which is exactly the opposite of what we are trying to do. But having said that, I started out by saying the West Chatham Neighborhood Center initially was meant to be really quite compact, quite small. And so in that case, I'd have been dead set against single-family homes because there's not that much space. You know? You're defeating the whole objective if you will permit that, because that's what people will build, right? And the idea of expanding it, I'm less opposed, but I say there are plenty of single-family homes and will be more before our zoning law is effective. And therefore, having a prohibition once it becomes effective, I don't think is going to mean there's no single-family homes in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. There will be. So what we're talking about is over the long haul, so 50 years from now, when people are redeveloping, there may be a way to provide for, I don't know, a special permit or some way that you could take something that is currently a large single-family home and turn it into multiple smaller, I don't know. But I'm still, I think, on balance opposed because it's contrary to the whole philosophy of the West Chatham Neighborhood Center to create a housing stock which is other than single-family homes.
Right. I just want to make a comment. Isn't the development that Warren's referring to, isn't that a 40B? Yeah.
But that's one thing I wanted to just clarify. Whatever the town permits on that town-owned property will likely go a 40B route so that whatever requirements are in the zoning can be applied for a waiver. And even if it's detached single-family structures, it will be considered a multifamily development.
You know,
But-
that's another good point that I'm not technically qualified to comment on, but the idea that if you're building affordable, attainable housing by deed restriction, then, you know, that trumps most of the zoning provisions.
Right.
So you're going to be able to have single-family homes in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center in such case, and that's fine, you know, with me. So again, it would argue, no, we should continue to have our prohibition unless and until if somebody is building affordable housing.
Well, I think it's important to remember that if it's one singular lot, if there's two detached cottages, and they are resided in by two separate families, it's still a multifamily development. Those aren't single-family homes, because they're on the same property. So it's easy to, I think, sort of mix the land use with the building typology. But I think what your intent here made a lot of sense, as you said, when the district was smaller. But as it's expanded and the B zone is expanded, that was the recommendation I'd put forward to you in the memo, is to perhaps reconsider allowing them as uses in the B zone. But the transitional areas approach also makes a lot of good sense.
Yeah.
So-
I've got a couple.
Art can go first.
Yeah, okay, great.
Well, this sort of triggered many different things in me, especially what you wrote, Ryan, and then what Peter Kokolas also added to it. And I have a whole list of things that I think are challenges that I think have to work through this and could create directions that we don't necessarily want to go in. So here's my list of things, and I'm more than willing to go through an open discussion on just about all of this. But I think that single-family dwellings are a different game than multifamily. They're different commercial. They're different for everything, and I don't care where you put them. Not all the lots in the B zone are small. So are we subdividing those? Are we creating a subdivision that would subdivide those? The lots are gonna be smaller, so we'll make them 10,000 square foot lots, 5,000, 7,500 square foot lots. What is it that we're doing there? Because single-family homes, the way they're defined, and lots are the way to define, is they have to have a frontage, they have to have access, and all of that. Again, it's just something that's sticking in my head, because there's these lots that are bigger, and they're in the B zone, they could put a roadway back to there, put a commercial up front, and everything else is gonna be single-family homes in the back. I'm not interested in that, in the B zone. Can you have more than one single-family dwelling on a B-zone lot? I think the way we set up the West Chatham Neighborhood Center is you could have multiple structures on a lot. Now, is that the intent to here? Now, I understand with multifamily, yeah, that's the game plan. That's what we want to see. I think you have to ask all these same questions about what if somebody's going to put single-family dwellings that way too, multiple single-family dwellings on a lot. I don't know. I'm just open-ended question. How do you actually achieve a smaller single-family dwelling? You know, you can, if you put setbacks in here and whatnot, yeah, how do you actually restrict it? Do you want to limit it to 1,500 square feet, one level, two level? I mean, is this more criteria that we need to put in here for this?
Exactly, yes.
Because this is something that I would say we're going to have to look, delve into, and we may not want to for this go-round, and it could create something that we don't want to see. And the thing that was driving me is when I saw what happened with off the theater district, where we had a subdivision there, and those were smaller lots and challenges associated with that. They're all single-family dwellings. They're going to be luxury-type units. Is that what we're looking for here? I go along with what Warren was saying, is that our original intent on this is we want to increase the density here for multifamily. We want that to be the focus and direction. And there's other opportunities on how you can achieve all of those other things that you described. I'm not sure I'm ready for this in here. And if it was, you'd almost have to have an exclusive area that you were focusing in on, and I would want it, and all the stuff in here that we have on this plan with the light blue, I don't want to see it there. And I think that would change everything. Multifamily, absolutely. That's what really we're trying to focus on here, because 90% of the town is all single family. We don't have to worry about more single family. We have plenty of it here in town. So those are just a couple of things, and I'm sure there's probably several more that I've forgotten.
Okay, great. Yes, I think Bob was next. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to wear my Energy and Climate Action Committee hat for a minute and say that single-family, the town cannot really afford to be building a lot more single-family houses for the extra driveways, all the extra piping, the heat loss. I could spend a lot of time talking about the difference in the sustainability of a single family versus a multifamily house. So from that standpoint, I would say no just for that. But you can think you're in a single family row house is a single family in my mind. It just happens to share a wall with somebody else. So the idea that we have to, only way we can accommodate people is that they each get this tiny bit of lawn with all the services needed to serve that one house by itself is pretty absurd. So I do not think that a single family is appropriate in these areas.
Okay, good. Megan?
Just to play devil's advocate, because I think it's easy for all of us sitting here in our single-family homes to say, okay, no more single-family homes. I just want to make sure that if we are going to do that, we make a very concerted effort in both language and practice to allow and promote and make sure we get some single-family independent living for affordable, like in the Habitat. And I do want to mention that one of the problems we have in this town is not that we don't have enough single-family home, but that it's priced so astronomically high that you can't get in. I got an email today from somebody who was like, there's a $625,000 starter house. Well, that's great, but $625,000, even though we think that that's a starter house in this town, and this person who's selling it wants to get a family in there, that's ridiculous to think that. You need $300,000, $250,000. I mean, it's not given the cost of everything else. Yes, I know the bank will technically give you a loan if you only make $150,000 for that house, but you shouldn't get one. That's a whole nother issue. But so I just want to be aware that when we are saying we have enough of something, but not what we're thinking of. So is there a way for us to allow for, and maybe it's not in this neighborhood center, maybe it's in the next one, so I'm not like hell-bent on having it right here, but maybe there's a way for us to zone in some even more than attainable or attainable single-family homes, because I can tell you that at age 35 or whenever, however old I was when I bought my house, I wasn't going to buy a row house. That's not the definition of success to me. I don't live in the city. I don't want a row house. I want a house just like you have, and you have, and you have, and you have. And so it's easy for us to sit up here and say that we have enough of it, but we don't have enough of it at a price point that's going to get a family
Right.
here. That's all.
Can I just circle back to what I mentioned at the beginning? And I want to connect it with something that Arthur said, and certainly the professional planners should comment. But going back to this idea of creating these transitional areas and even looking for other areas in town, and basically we're going to have to create another zoning, a new zoning, all the points that Arthur brought out that clearly define areas. And in West Chatham, it seems to lend itself well that there's sort of wings around West Chatham proper that would lend themselves well to this type of zoning. There may be other areas in town that also could do this, but we would essentially have to create another type of zoning that would specifically allow for greater residential density, smaller single-family homes, but we'd have to define clearly all the parameters that Arthur mentioned. And it would be another project. It would be another
And maybe
zoning.
even from a
Yes.
sustainability standpoint, those two properties share a driveway. I mean, there's ways to
Yeah.
do that and still have
Yeah.
single-family homes. But I just want to make sure that we're not thinking, okay, well, shut the door on that, let's move on.
No, I'm not thinking that way.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think both of your points make a lot of sense to me. There's a lot of things to flush out, and we have to put them in the right place. And I think if we find both of those things done, we can accomplish that. I don't think it's part of what we're trying to do here at this point. But I agree with you completely on your point, and we should look into opportunities actually creating those. But village centers, I'd like to keep the multifamily criteria as much as we can. I like the idea of perhaps looking at it as, at the wings and all of that, because transition areas are always perfect places to consider things like
Be
this.
nice, yeah.
So,
It would be nice aesthetically. It would also be nice for the people who live there because they're close to the neighborhood center, and it's, walkable. And it's also a nice transition into the rest of Route 28 where it's now zoned R20. It used to be small business. So it would be nice in terms of living there, I think, and also in terms of aesthetics. So that's can be our next project. I think we should work on that.
Yeah.
My humble opinion. Yeah. Mr. Dubus.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Ms. Chairman, we have to be very careful about spot zoning in this town,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
I'm all for what you're trying to appropriate and pick places to do it in. But once you start spot zoning, then everybody's going to jump on the bandwagon. That's been a big problem in this town, spot zoning. The easterly side of the West Chatham corridor, the lots are long and narrow.
Yeah.
So if we were to do some thinking about that, we'd have to figure out a way to allow the lot frontage to be less, to get what we want. Say, if they could put, well, in a couple of the lots, they go all the way from 28 back to the pond. They're very long, they will be on sewer. You could put, actually, in my opinion, you could put 3 small houses on that lot. And there's a couple of them like that. I'm sure you could count how many, but, and to me, that would be an appropriate use of that land with one driveway down one side, and then you could spot 3 small houses down there, make the lot small, and that would accommodate a lot of families when you don't have the frontage. And I don't believe that's spot zoning, that's changing the rules to
Correct.
allow
Correct.
single-family houses in the outskirts, like you're saying.
Yes.
And they would have access to 28, walking ability. This is just this instant east of here.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's other places in town that would qualify to that same regulation or zoning, but we have to be very careful about just saying, okay, this
Yes.
piece here, we can do that too, this piece here, we can do that too, and spot zone,
Yeah, no, that's not what I
you'll
meant.
open up a can of worms with people going, hey, I want to do something here, and why don't you let me do it? So, but I think that's a good idea in general.
Okay.
So is there anything in the existing provisions that wouldn't let you take that long strip and make it into?
Frontage.
Well, no, it's not frontage because it's one unit. It's a multifamily property on that one unit. It's defined as 4 separate buildings on that one property.
These could be
Bob?
these could be individually owned.
They can be. They can be in part of a condominium. It's one unit, and each person owns their lot. I mean, it's
Yes.
going to take some creativity from a builder, but I don't think what we have here precludes that from happening.
No, I don't either. I think that would be the way to approach it, as a condo type thing. But then again, you're changing the zoning to condominium.
But we,
Condominium's a form of ownership, not a
yeah,
use.
Oh, all
so
right.
we can't zone for that.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a really interesting discussion, and maybe I can talk with my colleagues to see if we can bring some information back to you that makes more clear the distinction between single-family zoning and single-family structures.
Yeah.
Because there is a distinction there that's getting a little bit muddied. But I mean, we have some great examples of one lots that have multiple single-family structures that are a condominium form of ownership. They're very efficient uses of land that provide housing for more than one family. And I think that's a model you're trying to replicate here.
Okay, good. Good. But to sum up, I'm getting the sense of the board that still for West Chatham proper, we want to stick with our prohibition for single-family homes.
And I'm going to withdraw my recommendation that you consider them in the B zones, because we'd have to make some additional modifications to the building footprint maximums, which the B
Right.
zones allow a 4,000
Right.
building footprint maximum. So, I think you're on the right track, and I'll withdraw that recommendation.
Okay. Any other comments on this point before we move on to the next point, which is a big one, and which is also on your memo from March 22nd about affordable and attainable? If there's no other discussion on this, we can move on to affordable and attainable. Ryan, did you want to start us off on that?
Sure, I'll try. So this was the outstanding item that seemed that it needed more work. I think all of the other topics that you've talked through tonight, we could get a recommendation there for making tweaks here and there. But this clearly doesn't provide the assurances I think you're looking for affordable and attainable housing in the district. So the suggestion was that the staff recommendation for that hearing would have been to pause on recommending the articles to town meeting and delve into these two topics a little bit more, define them within the bylaw, and then put some thresholds in place that provide those assurances along with the density allowances. So maybe I'll pause there and you can discuss it, and then we can switch to the second memo for tonight.
Okay, yes. Comments about attainable and affordable?
Here.
Yes,
And
yes.
I think until staff has the opportunity to work on the inclusionary bylaw, which would provide the different parameters, how many large A affordable, how many little a affordable, that kind of thing. We can talk about this till the cows come home. But until we see some language that we can actually discuss and really look at, I think that's the direction that we need to go.
Yeah, and that's a priority task of the new housing director. I believe she had spoken to you in the fall about bringing that forward. She's with us tonight, so I'll let her jump in whenever she's ready. But we wanted to talk about scheduling a couple of dedicated work sessions with you to talk through what some of those initial thresholds might be, and a timeline for bringing a town-wide inclusionary ordinance forward. There's a little bit of a challenge there because that's a significant sort of planning effort. And I think what we're looking for West Chatham is just a small piece of that. You know, the goal for West Chatham is to bring this back to 2024 town meeting, and even if there's a fall special town meeting, to be ready, right? That's why we jumped right back into this. How that squares with the development of an inclusionary ordinance may be a bit tricky, but maybe we can start with just the two definitions as we've provided them here. So, right, when you zone, you define a use and you regulate a use. And so we didn't even have these uses defined clearly to how you were considering them in the overall zoning bylaw. But they are defined in a home rule petition that allows the trust some more flexibility in how we fund these different type levels of affordability in these projects. So affordable housing is defined as up to, well, currently in the bylaw, affordable housing is defined as up to 80% of the area median income, and I believe it's 70% of, I'm looking at Gloria, because maybe I just misquoted that.
Sorry.
Gloria, did you want to go ahead, or? I'll let Ryan and Gloria, you decide how you want to proceed.
Brian, you can feel free to proceed. I'm happy to be here answering questions. Although I do want to comment on that, the 80% AMI for affordability. I know that there's a lot of discussion about, oh, does it go up to 100% because the CPA can fund up to 100%. I feel really strongly that we should stick with the state and federal definitions of affordability being 80% AMI and below. Funding sources are really different than definitions, and just in order to be clean and clear, and so everyone understands that we're all talking about the same thing, I would say that affordable, capital A, would be 80% AMI and below, and attainable would be above 80%, and then in our special legislation, we had defined it up to 200%. And I'm going to pass it back to Ryan now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gloria.
Yeah, and that's a good distinction. I mean, up to 80% AMI is what allows that unit to be considered on the subsidized housing inventory, which is, you know, a 10% goal that every town in the Commonwealth has.
I think we should always talk, when we talk about AMI, about actually how much that is, because it's pie in the sky if we're not really paying attention to what that means.
Yeah, and the HUD's new income numbers are due out in the next few weeks, but the 2022 numbers were pretty, I mean, it was a 30% increase. It was 86, I think.
86.
For a family of how big?
Four.
Four.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, the numbers have been quite staggering lately. So yes, we do need to put that into context, and maybe we can do that as part of a workshop when we have the new HUD numbers.
Yeah, good.
And if I'm, and I think
Yes.
it's important, in every community I've ever been associated with, there's always been a misunderstanding that we don't get to set those numbers.
Right.
The federal government sets those numbers. And it's not a number for Chatham, it's not a number for Bourne, it's Barnstable County. So we're kind of stuck with that. And a lot of people sometimes don't understand that somebody else is responsible for setting that, and we have no control over it, which is very frustrating.
Right. Other comments? Or Ryan, did you want to continue?
So I'm bouncing around a little bit, but I did want to just point out that the town does have a mandatory affordable housing provision. It requires that 10% of developments, 10 units or greater, provide some affordability within that development. However, it's never been used to create a single affordable unit because there's a payment in lieu option there that has been more attractive, I think, for developers to use. So, you know, that's the piece that we need to look at in terms of what's not working, and almost replace that entirely with an inclusionary ordinance that fixes that bylaw to match its original intent, and then components of that would be reflected in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center.
Yes, Warren?
I would agree completely with those comments. I'm not sure what state our draft is currently, but our density of 8 units per acre, if it ends up, if that's the final version, I think I'm the one who actually proposed it back when. I'm against that because it doesn't end up with any affordable / attainable housing
Right.
necessarily ever being built.
Right, exactly, yeah. So,
Whereas I would say at the very least, our density ought to be able to say a minimum of 8 units per acre, of which 1 must be attainable, affordable, whichever, I'm not the one who ought to decide that. And then you would have the incentives on top of that, so you could go up to 12 units per acre, of which 2 would have to be affordable, attainable. So you could theoretically end up with 12 units per acre, of which 3 were affordable, attainable. And that's, I think, the way I would ensure that it, no matter who does anything there, there is going to be some affordable, attainable housing created. We should also, I think, expressly prohibit payments in lieu of building those units that you are required to have.
yes.
You can't buy your way out of this. You've got to build them. And that's, that's what we're trying to do. So it seems to me we ought to say so
Yeah.
in the zoning.
Good. I'm seeing everybody nod, so I think in general there's agreement. I think Charlene and then Megan.
Just one thing, we want to be sure that we have affordable and attainable.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
Not
absolutely.
a choice there or what have you, but we need to create both of those.
Yeah,
So for example, if you had 8 units and you wanted to get a bonus, you could then have 12 units, of which 2 are affordable, 1's attainable, or something like that. I'm just throwing that out, that the math may not work properly, but we want to be sure we're creating both types of necessary housing.
yeah, good. Megan,
My question is directly related. So as someone who has been sitting on the Affordable Housing Trust, I know the funding source is probably better than I used to, at least. It's easier to find funding to build affordable because of the nature of, for the town. Can we change this so that the developer is taking on that attainable piece? I say this because as a town, it's easier, and easy's not the right word, which is why I keep hesitating. It's slightly easier to build affordable housing because of the funding sources, but.
More opportunity.
More opportunity, exactly. But attainable housing is virtually impossible until we can get our everything changed. So is there a way for us to delineate this type of thing for attainable so that we can focus on affordable with the town funded, or is that not legal?
So CPA restricts the funding for affordable housing up to 100%, right? So anything beyond that, I mean, anything that a housing trust has that is not a CPA-sourced line item can be used for attainable housing, it's my understanding, and I'll look to Gloria to correct me if I'm wrong, but as long as they aren't CPA funds, if they've been provided by a developer as a payment in lieu, then those can be used to an applicant for an attainable unit to help buy down that.
As long as you never mingle them, yeah.
I think that's a good summary, and that is true. I think that payment in lieu becomes very important specifically for that attainable component because, as was mentioned, there are no state and federal tax credits available for attainable housing. There's limited mass housing funds available up to 120% of AMI, and anything beyond that, any subsidy that's required to fill that gap between the cost of an actual market rate unit and the lower price cost of an attainable unit will have to be subsidized in some way or another, probably by the town. So it would be really great if we could potentially harness some payment in lieu fees to specifically go to support attainable housing.
okay.
And so to that point, the mandatory provision in the bylaw, we're not discussing as part of this work, changing that, right? That will be a part of an inclusionary ordinance amendment. And for the time being, including language here that overrules that section of the bylaw, right? So changing the capture threshold, rather than it being 10-unit developments, it's 8-unit developments. So start with where your density threshold is.
Yeah.
So we can come up with some language that says, notwithstanding other provisions of this bylaw, this is what you're prescribing in West Chatham.
Yeah.
But we still need to figure out what those thresholds are. Is it 10%, if it's an 8 units per acre density, are we talking about 10% of the units? I mean, what about smaller developments, a 4-unit development? We get into some reasonable rounding, at what point are we actually capturing a unit? So I think Gloria and I need to put our heads together on that and come back with some recommendations for you.
Okay, yeah,
I
Gloria.
think that's another place where payment in lieu can be really valuable, because there is a reasonable threshold where a developer will be able to kind of cover the cost of an affordable or an attainable unit, depending on the size and scale of the development. But when you talk about those smaller developments of, 3, 4, maybe even 5 units, you're not going to be able to get an affordable or an attainable unit to actually pencil out in that without heavy subsidy from the town. And we really want to try to get it to work out so that the town's, not a piggy bank. But I think that that's the potential for payment in lieu also, that maybe we have some sort of formula where there is a payment in lieu for a really small level of development, where we wouldn't necessarily expect them to build a unit, but we would want some financial contribution. Because when you think about the reasoning behind inclusionary, it really is to kind of stem the switchover of like all these expensive houses being built and the loss of our affordable housing stock. And I think that any market rate development that happens will definitely have an impact on, year-round rentals and affordable rentals. And it makes sense to apply those payment in lieus or payments in lieu to those small developments as a way of kind of balancing out the detrimental impact.
Okay,
So how does rental work? If I build a multifamily unit that I'm actually renting out all 8 units, how does that designate as one of them being affordable? It's just that I have a rent control on one of my 8 units?
If it's big A affordable, it would be a deed restricted unit that the town would petition DHCD as a unit that was created through our inclusionary zoning as a local action unit. And it would be subject to a regulatory agreement and a fixed rental amount that's determined and changes every year based on HUD's income numbers. So for the big A affordable model, that's clear. For the little a attainable, the town acts as sort of that monitoring agent and uses guidance from DHC to determine appropriate rents, et cetera. But we can mirror that sort of state process for attainable units as well.
Okay, then my other question, my concern is if it triggers at 8, I'm only gonna build 7. And all my properties are gonna be 7 units, so I never have to get to 8. It's just how it's gonna work. So, yeah, I don't know the answer to any of this, but,
Well, again, the 8 wasn't an absolute number of units. It was 8, the density, it's a density figure of 8 per acre. If you're building on a half an acre, that might suggest that you need 4. And I don't know the answer as to how many of the 4 need to be big A affordable.
we could do it.
That's a different question. But the point is that the 8 doesn't mean you can build 7 and you get nothing. No, I mean, overall, the area is zoned to be able to have a minimum of 8 units per acre.
yeah, but I'll put up a storefront on front of it, so I only have to build 7 units or whatever. There's gonna be a way around it.
Can there be an incentive on a sliding scale so that the more you build, the more you get?
That's what I liked about Warren's
Well, yeah,
suggestion.
that was the idea. But the idea was also that we want a density of 8 units per acre. If there's commercial in there too, yes, of course. But if you're gonna be putting up units, they're multifamily, multi-use, and we want 8 of them per acre. If you've got a half-acre lot, well, then I don't know how many that turns into in terms of affordable. And that, somebody else can figure out what makes sense for that. And how many of them how many that are subsidized, affordable, or attainable, what that ratio of one to the other is, I don't have a strong opinion. What I want to see is that when somebody develops in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center, that at the end of the day, there really is a housing unit that is affordable or attainable, at least
Or
one
both,
per acre.
or more. I think we should look at more.
And the
I think we should
incentives,
look
in
at more.
theory, should be adequate to say that you would end up with at least 3 per acre. If it's a half-acre lot or a three-quarter or something,
yeah.
I'm not sure how you come up with it. But it
Why don't-
never would be the case, that I suggested anyway, that you'd be able to build X units and therefore not have to build any affordable attainable. No.
Could-
It was
if I could
always a
just make
ratio, a density.
comment, I know Charlene wants to talk and Bob, but if, I just want to make a comment. Why don't we think about what we'd like to see? And then we'll staff, Ryan and Gloria will work on the proper legal mechanisms to make that happen. Instead of thinking, well, we need to do this or we need to have an incentive, just decide what would we really like to see ideally? I'd like to see a lot more than one affordable unit for every 8, even though 8 is our minimum per acre. I mean, I'd like to see 25% be affordable, 25% be attainable, something like that. But let's think of what we want to see, and then we'll work out the details of the mechanisms to put that in place.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
I think it does, and the cost of developed housing has gotten so significantly high that it's not just inclusionary that we're talking about, it's inclusionary and incentive-based. So,
Yeah.
Density bonuses, these are the components of a more evolved ordinance that will work to deliver what you're looking for. So, yeah, I think Gloria and I can talk and try to come up with some recommendations.
To craft it, so, but think of what we just, what is the goal? Charlene, you wanted to make a comment, and I know Bob wants to make a
What
comment.
you guys just said.
Okay, great, perfect.
So my only other suggestion is the first unit is the affordable or attainable. Then you can build the other 5 or the other 6. So the whole idea is if you want to build here, that you have to build an affordable unit. It has, and I like the 25%. I think it should be one out of 4.
Yeah,
So the next 3 don't have to be, but if you build 5, then you're going to have 2 attainable or affordable units. So not at the top end where if you build 8, the 8th one has to be. It has to work from the other end. That the first one has to be.
yeah. And I think also, don't forget, we want affordable and attainable. So if we did 25% affordable and 25% attainable, it means 50% of West Chatham is going to fall into those 2 categories, which if I'm seeing some heads nod, yes, this is more what we want to see. It's more what our goal is. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay.
I'm all in favor of making it 2 out of 8 as a density figure per acre. I think that's great, and I think if you're allowed to require that they build them first, great. I'm all in favor of that.
Absolutely.
Again, the objective is to see them built, and it seems to me whatever zoning we have is having the opposite effect. No, you make the payment in lieu of, and it may be funding in a housing trust, which is available there, but if it means that they didn't build what you wanted them to build, I'm not sure that's a good trade-off, putting money in the till for a housing trust, but you didn't build the affordable unit,
And I don't think the payment in lieu is actually tantamount to what it costs to build these days.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's true.
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Dubus.
you guys are all sounding really well, except for one thing.
Yes.
where's the funding coming from? You have to build so many units to make it profitable to build an affordable unit. Okay? The money just doesn't grow off the trees. For somebody to put all this together, they're in it for a profit, okay? And that's the bottom line. So you're asking every fourth unit be affordable. I don't think that that's going to be attainable, because the other 3 units are going to be astronomically expensive to take that over. So you have to do a cost effectiveness on what it costs to build that unit, and out of that, what is the generalization of how much profit is a person entitled to? And then figure out, okay, does it take 5 units to build 1 unit? Does it take 2 units to build 1 unit? I don't think so. I think more or less that those 6 units could maybe support 2 units.
But it should be cutting into their profit at least a little bit.
They won't build them. This is all about profit in the world, okay? So is there a subsidy that would
Yeah.
qualify to say, okay, I'll put up 70%. Somebody else put up the 30% to make this happen. Remember,
Got it.
they're not building these multi-million-dollar houses in Chatham because they want to. They're building them because the profit margin in this town is immense, and that's the reason they're building these big houses.
But-
If it wasn't profitable, they would not build them.
But it's still more profitable than it is in Hyannis. So there's still going to be enough
I'm
money
not-
to be
I'm
made
not saying
at a
that,
certain
but
point, because the
It
astronaut.
costs more here than it does to build in Hyannis. That's one of
No,
the
it
things.
doesn't, really.
Property values, to buy that property is more expensive.
Well, but once
Building,
these
the builders
restrictions
here
on it,
are
the
more
property value will
expensive.
go down.
Everything here is more expensive. And so you have to take that all into consideration. It's about how much profit is that person entitled to, okay? And then back it up and see what you can do.
It's a really good point. I mean, you've identified the challenge with crafting inclusionary ordinance these days, because there's a sweet spot. I mean, 10% is not enough of a requirement to generate the housing that you need, and 25% is too high, right? It slows the development and redevelopment interest that you're trying to support. So there is a sweet spot, and Gloria is going to tell us what that is.
No pressure, Gloria, no pressure.
You don't mean right now, right?
Can I ask
can-
Gloria a question?
I can tell you that we already know that 25% works. That's what 40B is, right? And it works because there's state and federal tax credits that are available. I think that the idea of doing 50%, which was mentioned, like 25% affordable and 25% attainable, is probably not going to pencil out on a pro forma, but I'm happy to set some up and try to figure out what makes sense. But I would say that really what we're looking at is pushing as close as we can up to what 40B allows. So maybe we require, 20%, but if we give certain incentives, then we require 25%. And I know that Cambridge has already done an inclusionary, they have inclusionary and incentive zoning, but last year they bumped up their inclusionary requirement to 25%. So there's already precedence for that. And Provincetown's is at 16.67%, up to 20 or 25% with incentives also.
You have to get it close enough, though, but not so close that you are
That they
in.
choose 40B?
Yeah, because the
Instead?
yeah.
Exactly,
Not so close that they
that's
choose
exactly
40B,
it.
and not so close that they're looking for that same type of tax rebate, because you can't get it with attainable, and then you're back into the same problem of not having any attainable housing.
Is there IRA money that's available, or, no, IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act? Or the infrastructure that actually don't those two support these kinds of initiatives and that we should be looking at those as well?
A lot of the ARPA funds have been earmarked for housing and security, homelessness, et cetera, not the categories that we're talking about here.
Okay.
And the ARPA funds have to be used completely by a date certain. So it's not something that can live on and breathe on and sit in an account and earn money. It's got to be used.
Yeah, it would be used as an incentive or another tax write, a portion of the cost.
It's got to be used too quickly is part of the problem. And that's why a lot of.
IRA, the new stuff?
The ARPA through the COVID money and all that.
Oh, no. There's billions in new dollars in infrastructure reduction.
Can you send me what you know?
I don't know I know what the energy efficiency is. That you can build all these houses and make them net zero, and we can potentially get money for all of that as a group. So there are ways to get some money from this, and we should be exploring where it is, because there's a ton of money that's sitting out there.
I sound like a
People
broken
aren't
record. I
using.
just want to make sure we're not ignoring that we have this. We have to zone in attainable housing because there's no other way to get it in.
Good. Good. So I think, Gloria or Ryan, any other comments? I think,
So I was going to pitch a couple of dates to have a working session to come back to you with some preliminary recommendations on these two topics. These are all within your regularly scheduled meetings. The May 8th, the May 22nd, or the June 12th meeting are 3 dates where we would schedule some time. If available, we could meet in the small conference room, just so it's more of a workshop style format.
I'm sorry, what were the dates?
May 8th, May 22nd, or June 12th.
and how much time do you think that you and Gloria need to pull some recommendations together for us to consider?
I think the May 22nd date would be preferable. That'd give us a little bit more time. I mean, some of this is strategizing how we incorporate what you're looking to achieve here with an inclusionary and incentive-based bylaw, which has its own sort of development timeline and may not track as fast as what you're trying to do here. But we don't want to duplicate efforts, but I think there's a way for us to mirror what's coming with inclusionary as long as we're productive and proactive early.
Not that it's critical to have me there, but I might be not there in June.
In June, okay. So May 22nd, and May 22nd is our meeting starting at 4 or 5? Where are we now on this?
Annie, do you happen to know that? Thank you. And this is just a rough placeholder. I'll follow up to confirm
Yeah.
date, time, and location. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so, but I think any of these dates will work. So I think it's mostly at what works best for you.
Okay.
Yeah. And May 22nd sounds good. Yeah.
It's better than the
Yeah.
All right, so we'll target May 22nd to have more of a working discussion with some recommendations for you. And then following that, my intent is just to keep working on this through the summer, and as if though we were preparing for a fall town meeting.
Yeah.
We can, once we get language a little bit more refined, we could begin some public outreach in August and September.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the hope, at least.
Good, sounds good. Yes, Warren? And I know Charlene wants. No, okay. Okay, yes.
I had submitted some thoughts earlier on regarding my sense that we ought to give some consideration for guidance to the ZBA when the time comes for someone to tear down a structure that is on a non-conforming lot or it's non-conforming, to build something so that we can somehow guide the ZBA in terms of what they should approve in such case?
You're talking about West Chatham Neighborhood Center.
I'm talking about the
within.
West Chatham Neighborhood Center, because my experience, just as I look around me, is that what happens in Chatham, since most properties are non-conforming, is a developer or homeowner buys a house, tears it down, and builds something twice as big, twice as this, that, and the other, and they don't really have any requirement to conform to the new zoning or the zoning that's there. They need only justify to the ZBA that what they propose is no more deleterious to the neighborhood than what was there before, whatever that means. But what it does mean is that what gets built doesn't conform to the then current zoning, and it tends to be bigger and or other things. And it did occur to me, well, we're going to have redevelopment in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center, whether we, wanted to or not, over time. And we ought to give some thought as to what sort of guidance the zoning board or the planning board could give the ZBA as to when a special permit is requested to redevelop or to replace an existing structure that's in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. What are the criteria? What are the metrics that they ought to consider? Because as I see it, there's really nothing currently that's hard in terms of a metric with respect to single-family homes that are in that category.
Could I respond? Ryan and I briefly discussed this afternoon, and this is maybe a new idea, but another thing we could consider for the West Chatham Neighborhood Center zoning is that the planning board is the special permit granting authority for the West Chatham Neighborhood Center, and that we specify also that the planning board grants those special permits to fulfill the intent and purpose of the West Chatham Neighborhood Center bylaw, which we state in the bylaw. So that's another approach that we could consider.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
Go ahead,
So
Ryan.
two thoughts on that. I mean, it's a good observation. Typically, you run into nonconformities when you change zoning by down zoning. In this case, you're up zoning, right? You're lifting a lot of the restrictions, but I can still look to see if there might be a case study of a lot or a use that might be affected in that way that we would need to create some guidance for the ZBA. But that said, I think that for the handful of special permits that you identify in the use table here, it makes good sense for the planning board to be the SPGA for this district. There's precedent in town. The planning board is the SPGA for the flexible development overlay districts. So I think it makes good sense to propose that and see what sort of feedback.
Yeah, Arthur.
In my prior involvement with where I lived before, I was on a board for 17 years, planning board for 17 years, and we redeveloped the town, our town center in a village center format, just like we're describing here. We actually did the same thing. We made a decision that the planning board was the special permit granting authority, and it was very effective because we spent all the time looking at what the picture is that we're looking at. And it really helped us with formulate and work with whoever came before us. The pre-submission discussions got very open to drive a direction that we were looking for and trying to achieve on that. And it's difficult to do that if you just pass this over to another board. So I would highly recommend that for this area in West Chatham Neighborhood Center that we would be the special permit granting authority. I would think that would be a better way to go.
Good. Bob Dubus.
Arthur, would you consider that on all of the centers that we're going to attack in the near future?
Well, I think as long as you don't do this, I'm not a residential. I've always said that the single-family residential belongs someplace else.
No, I mean in the village centers. that
When
we're
you're
gonna-
talking about business centers, commercial centers, and things like that.
Right, we're going to
I
be
think
coming
that-
across, the next one is just down the street.
Yeah, I think that the planning board could serve better in that role for oversight and actually achieving what the town is looking for too. Because sometimes it's hard to pass this over to the ZBA. They have their hands tied with certain directions that they try to.
Single-family housing.
Yeah, well, no. Again, I'm not, I like to keep our purview where it is, but I think this is one where we can step our toe in, and I think it would be the right decision.
Right. No, I agree with you, Arthur, on the zoning for the village centers, that this board probably has a little more
Insight.
up-to-date
Yeah.
insight, knowledge, or feeling for it. Thank you.
Yeah. Megan?
I just want to completely agree, having come here from the zoning board, there is a distinct, I don't know, the angle there is basically, is it more detrimental to the neighborhood? How do the neighbors feel? What does it look like within the neighborhood that it's in? And when we're trying to change and revision what's happening, I think it's critical to do it from this seat.
Yeah. Charlene?
Totally agree, 100%. Just a caution that the planning board cannot be the special permit granting authority for an alteration of a pre-existing non-conforming structure. Only the ZBA can. That being said, if there's a single-family home that they want to tear down and rebuild into something really big, there's not a whole lot you can do with that because that is protected under Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 6. There's just, we can't encroach on that, I don't think, any which way. So there are some areas where we are not going to perhaps get what we want, but I think that the zoning incentive is there, that somebody may look at their single-family dwelling and go, wow, you know, I can do better by going with the existing zoning and not keeping my single-family home and expanding upon what I've got here.
And then it falls back into our purview then, once they do that, when they head in that new direction.
Provided everything meets all the other requirements of the overlay bylaw, then yes.
And if they need a special permit to build another McMansion, perhaps if we've had a discussion, a clear education, for lack of a better word, of what our goals are to the zoning board, then that can be taken into consideration as far as, is it more detrimental to the neighborhood? Because it could be more detrimental to the neighborhood if the goal of the neighborhood is to become a center.
That would make sense, yeah. That would make sense. Good. So I think the board is basically in agreement about this as well. And that will address some of your concerns, Warren, but obviously not all of them. Yeah.
I'm happy if I can get half of my concerns. But I do think to the extent that the ZBA is essentially required to be involved in special permits of single-family houses,
Pre-existing
doesn't
non-conforming.
in any way restrict our ability to provide guidance to the ZBA as to single-family homes in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center ought to be viewed through a lens that includes items which are not necessarily what's in the general bylaw.
Yeah. We have to redefine what's, as Megan was suggesting, redefine what's potentially detrimental to the neighborhood. Yeah. Okay, great. So I think we're pretty much done with our working session, okay? I think it was really productive. And then we will have a working session again on May 22nd, correct, Ryan?
Yes.
That's the date we're setting, with some more recommendations from Ryan and Gloria. Okay. So the next item on our agenda is we did want to provide an opportunity for public comment about the West Chatham Neighborhood Center draft zoning bylaw amendments, because we were not able to hold the public hearing and we promised the public there would be an opportunity tonight for public comment. I think it should be obvious we don't have what we could call a final draft yet. It's still a work in progress, but if there's anyone connected remotely who would like to comment, we're happy to hear what you'd like to say. I don't see any hands raised. Is there one? Is that Rick Levitt? Please go ahead. Mr. Levitt,
Thank you, Catherine.
you're welcome.
Wow, what a session. You guys, I don't envy you guys. This is a really important subject. It was written about, what, extensively in our comprehensive plan? I think, Catherine, you asked the fundamental question, what would we really like to see? What we really want to see is diverse housing that will provide the housing for a diverse population here in Chatham. I'm a little concerned about concentrating just one type of housing, for example, in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. I don't think we want to concentrate one type of housing. Our real concern, all your concerns, and I share them, we want diversity of housing. A diversity that will provide housing for 80% of AMI or 60 or 40 or even 30% of AMI and up to 200 of AMI. That's the diversity we need here. And that's what village centers are all about. We are so fortunate here in Chatham to have many examples of diverse, I call them missing middle housing. Chatham's historic downtown and old village were built pre-zoning over a century ago, before any zoning, with small homes and small lots, duplexes and triplexes. They're here today. Attached townhouses like Munson Meeting and small apartment buildings like Oyster Heights were built more recently. West Chatham Center has townhouses on Sea Strand Way and small apartment buildings on Weldon Way, serving the diverse housing needs of our diverse community. So I'm all for what you're talking about tonight. It's very difficult. We've got a difficult task ahead of us, and I compliment you on tackling it. I would give you just one suggestion here tonight. Bring Union Studio Architects to Chatham. Union Studio's Cape Cod Commission-sponsored Missing Middle Housing presentation was given to 5 other towns on the Cape. Their work can be seen in historic Brewster and Dennis Village Centers on Route 6A. By the way, their development in Brewster is called Brewster Landing. It was 28 homes on 3 acres. The density was almost 10, just what you're talking about. They were all single-family homes surrounding a large open green. 1/4 of them, 25%, were sold as deed restricted, quote, big A affordable. This was 3 or 4 years ago, and they sold for around $200,000. The other 20 sold for around $500,000. That's small A. There was no other big units or mansions that you're talking about. We're not concerned about that in West Chatham Center. We can devise zoning regulations that would actually mirror, as you have talked about, Chapter 40B. And that's what I would like to see us do here for West Chatham Center. The excellent presentation and work of Union Studio and Brewster and Dennis demystifies density and will reassure Chatham residents that we can solve Chatham's affordable housing shortage while preserving Chatham's historic small town character. That's going to be very important when we go to town meeting. So I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you. I'll try to put my thoughts down in a memo to you as I have before and send it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. Any other people who've joined us? Yes?
Elaine Gibbs?
Yes. Is that Elaine?
Yes, it is.
Please
Thank
go
you.
ahead, Elaine.
Okay, thank you. I had gone through the entire document. It was a little hard to follow, and I guess I'm a little confused about the objective here. I agree with Megan when she had said that it's really important to consider what people who are going to end up living here want versus what you think they want. And I think it's really important to make sure that if this is considered a neighborhood center, that that is exactly what it is, that people feel like they're living in neighborhoods. It seems to me what you're doing in terms of numbers is putting in as many units as possible where maybe 10% will end up being affordable or attainable. So I'm just going to go through quickly the draft and make some comments. Some aren't germane to the actual housing, but I just want to go on record with them. As in terms of the district map, I don't understand why the district has been extended to the east on the south side all the way to 1497, but not on the north side. Clearly past the Buckley property, it's really not part of the neighborhood unless you include those on the north. It just makes no sense to me. And I had asked that question once before, and I think I was told that some people said on the north side that they didn't want to be part of the district. So I did not know that was an option. If you're going to do it, it seems to me that it should actually look like a neighborhood center on both sides. In terms of the setbacks, I'm thinking about the aesthetics and also the workability. It's a minimum of 10 feet to a maximum of 20 feet, and it says from the road. Road is not defined. Is that the sidewalk? Is that the lot boundary line? Is that the state right-of-way? Is that the easement? When that corridor was put in, some easements were taken by the state. It's different on the north than it is on the south. And I think that has to be clearly defined, or you're going to have developers saying, I can build back X number of feet further because this is my boundary. This is a state highway and our main supply corridor to downtown. And I think only allowing a maximum 20-foot setback is way too close to the road. You're saying in that they have to have a front door, sidewalks, they can have awnings, green space, but they're not going to be able to fit that if they're literally 10 to 20 feet from the sidewalk. I don't know why you can't allow a further setback to break it up a little bit, as long as it's green space and not parking. And I think you're going to be dealing with all kinds of, there's a lot of minutia in here that I think builders are going to go crazy over. If there are telephone poles that are where you're saying they have to have green space or a sidewalk, who's going to move the telephone poles? Because there are a lot of telephone poles. The required landscaping that you're asking them to do over time is going to grow. It's going to close in that corridor more. It's going to be over the sidewalks. It's going to impact the sidewalks. I would think you'd want to leave that up to the developers. So I think that a 10 to 20-foot setback is fine in rural areas, but not on a state road, and I would hope that that gets pushed back. In terms of residential, again, if this is truly going to be a neighborhood, I do think residential should be allowed. You can define it however you want if there's 1 or 2 homes on a property, but I think that's important for a true neighborhood. And in terms of the density, again, it goes back to what are we trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to accomplish something where we really can provide affordable, attainable, whether you call it that, or simply reasonably priced homes for people in the neighborhood when you're saying a minimum of 8 units per acre and a maximum of 12? No build out numbers have been done. What is this going to look like potentially if that happens? I believe the district right now is about 50 acres. If you only develop 30 of those and those are your requirements, that could result in 360 units. That's not including the Buckley property, 1,080 bedrooms, and that could potentially have 2,000 people. And only 30 or 40 of them would be affordable under your formula. The maximum build-out studies, I think, should be completed before you decide what the minimum and maximum should be Then there's the allow below-ground residential as long as there's natural light and egress. I really wish you would take that out. I think that, first of all, residential use isn't defined, and it should not include a bedroom. The fact of the matter is, if you put in some homes there, and that's going to be a bedroom, and there's going to be a child in it, and to say that in the event of a fire that a child would have to break a window to get out if he can't get up the stairs, I think would be wrong. I don't think we should be building in Chatham residence for people who have few options where one of their children might be in a basement. It's just not right. On the district amendment explanation, it clearly states on page 12 that there is to be no net increase in square footage of structures within the RPZ. But then when you look at the R20 amendment, it says that an RPZ allows 50% increase of building square footage. So you're actually saying that in the RPZ, existing dwellings can increase the building square footage by 50%. Is that livable space, gross space, or lot coverage? And I don't believe that is permitted in the RPZ. So I don't see how Costello could have approved that. There's not supposed to be any increase within the RPZ in terms of density. And if you're increasing a home by 50%, then you're increasing density. I don't see any places designated in this corridor for open space, parks, or playgrounds. Again, if this is going to be a neighborhood, it seems to me that all of that should be incorporated in there for the quality of life for the people who are living there. And then in terms of the rentals, year-round rentals, it seems to me you're trying to create both workforce housing and year-round housing with one bylaw with that 181-day. What I see happening is that if a developer comes in, buys a piece of property, follows your guidelines, whether it's affordable or they decide it's not going to be affordable, that you could have people from out of state buying these units and renting them out. And there's nothing you can do to stop that. These are non-resident investment property owners. And under this bylaw, that can happen. And I believe that will happen. They will buy up the units and they will rent them out, and they can get somebody to say they're renting it for a year and then they'll sublet it for 6 months. So I think that really has to be worked on. I think what you're going to find is you're going to be building an area that you intend for affordable housing that is going to be picked up by investors. There's no requirement people have to live in Chatham. You can be 100% non-resident and still own property in Chatham. You don't have to vote here. You can rent them out. So I think that needs a lot of work. And if these are being sold or rented, you're going to run into the same problems because we don't have the manpower. If somebody rents it out and says, I'm renting it for a year, they could be subletting it or leaving it empty, and then it defeats the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish. Another issue is that no traffic studies have been done in terms of the increase along this corridor based on the potential long-term build-out. Traffic studies count the number of entries and exits onto the corridor with a potential of 360 units, which would be the build-out of 12 per acre on 30 acres. That could result in 4,320 cars on this stretch added to that number. And that's what traffic studies do. And I think you have to find out if that can be sustained there. That is a lot of traffic in that corridor. And one of the final things is water. I don't think there's been any coordination with the water and sewer about what this increase in density means in terms of our water quality, potential water usage, based on 1,000 bedrooms that would be, with the 360 build out, not including the businesses or the town's pumping and storage capacity. This district is located in large part within our Water Resource Protection District, and we have to make sure that if you're literally talking potentially over the long haul, an increase of 2,000, we only have 6,500 people, but that's what your build out could end up being. That's a lot of water, and you got to figure out what that impact is going to be. So I guess what I'm feeling is that bylaws should be really crystal clear and answer all the questions when you read it, not generate more questions. I think builders, if they look at this, they're going to walk away. It's too complicated. It's too micromanaged. And I don't see where developers would want to necessarily come in and have to follow all these rules and develop it. And I'm afraid it's going to defeat what your objectives. So I hope you look at doing a reverse planning. What do you want the neighborhood to look like in the end? What do you want for the quality of life for the people you're trying to attract there? And how are you going to get there? And I think that this is the reverse. You're trying to put in a lot of units and then force people to build them, force people to take a loss, as Mr. Dubas said, in development, and I just don't think they're going to do it. And the quality of life for the people that you really, they want to live in a community. They want green space. They want a park. You know, they want a place to take their kids. And I don't see that in the vision of this area right now. And I think it could be lovely, and I think it could work. But right now, what I see is a lot of just jamming people in, and people who have very few choices in terms of where they can live. And you want to make it a neighborhood that is truly a neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elaine. Any other comments? Did I see Gloria? I see another hand, but I can't see the name. Is that?
Yes, it's Gloria.
Gloria, all right. Go ahead, Gloria.
Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Gloria Freeman, and speaking for the Board of Directors of the West Chatham Association, Inc., a recognized 501c3 organization representing West Chatham businesses and residents. The following is a statement that was to be made at your previous meeting, which was canceled. Thank you for this opportunity to present some of our concerns about your proposed zoning. We are speaking generally. We will not discuss the lack of definitions such as workforce housing or our serious concerns with the use table and all the uses allowed by special conditions, as well as many others. Instead, we will begin at the beginning, which is the purpose you have provided for the proposed zoning. The first purpose you suggest is, quote, to implement the goals in the Town of Chatham's comprehensive plan, end quote. The land use section of the long-range comprehensive plan has only two goals. The first goal is, quote, to permit only that growth and development that is consistent with the carrying capacity of Chatham's natural environment in order to maintain the quality of life in our town. Chatham should retain its small town and seaside resort character, and development should maintain that, not minimize or destroy it. Promote the redevelopment and reuse of existing property rather than the development of vacant land. Bylaws and regulations should be created to ensure that intensity is maintained or minimized, never maximized, end quote. Even a quick look at your proposed zoning shows that it is in direct conflict with that goal. Your chair has said in answer to that conflict that the planning board has decided that times change and the town has new needs and desires, and that is perfectly acceptable. But we request that in the spirit of transparency and honesty, you say that, and not relate your plan to the long-range plan. What you are saying is not true, and it casts a shadow on all your work that follows. The Long-Range Comprehensive Plan suggests only growth and development that is consistent with the carrying capacity of the town. There have been no studies of the impact of the growth and development that you are proposing. You are proposing a minimum of 8 housing units per acre. Assuming there are 30 acres in your defined neighborhood center, excluding roads, at a minimum of 8 housing units per acre, that would allow 720 bedrooms, and 12 housing units would allow 1,080 bedrooms. There have been no studies on water quality and quantity, and remember, most of West Chatham is within our Water Resource Protection Overlay District. No studies on environmental impact, no traffic studies, no quality of life discussions. We understand that the development you envision will not all happen at one time, but we ask what it is you are planning for. Certainly not what we have valued in Chatham in the past. Your second assigned purpose of your proposed zoning is stated, quote, to preserve and enhance the existing character of the West Chatham Neighborhood Center, end quote. How do you preserve and enhance a neighborhood? By limiting single-family homes, or by limiting development to 8 housing units per acre. Somehow forgotten or overlooked is that the Long-Range Comprehensive Plan states that commercial development and redevelopment be limited to the existing commercial areas of the existing neighborhood. Also, that any commercial redevelopment be for residentially scaled business. Maybe you think that is a bad idea too, and it is within your authority to propose changes. But again, don't say you are implementing the Long-Range Comprehensive Plan if you are creating zoning directly in contradiction with what the plan states. We are asking for honesty and transparency. If this is what you believe to be in the town's best interest, we ask you to own it. Don't blame the Long-Range Comprehensive Plan, which promotes quality of life and protection of our environment, as well as an understanding of the town's carrying capacity. Another purpose you propose is to allow more diverse housing types attainable to year-round residents of all income levels. That's a good purpose, but your proposed provides no protections to ensure that West Chatham won't become a haven for short-term rentals or summer workers, especially if you allow a minimum 181-day lease term. That's 6 months of the year. Buying up these dwellings will be a good investment for some. Regarding the second goal of the Long-Range Comprehensive Plan, quote, to preserve existing neighborhood centers by limiting their boundaries based on the collective needs and desires of each specific neighborhood's residents, and to maintain a concentration of commercial, residential, and mixed use in these neighborhoods, including affordable housing, beneficial retail, and service uses as needed, end quote. And all of this without increasing density and intensity. That's what the Long-Range Comprehensive Plan provides. So what happened here? West Chatham residents turned out for meetings in numbers between 100 and 140 persons, 3, maybe 4 times, one in the dead of winter. Several of our members were involved in a car accident after that winter meeting. But one reason they were willing to attend these meetings was because they believed the long-range comprehensive plan gave them the right to define the boundaries of their neighborhood. They made it clear that the neighborhood center was to be one lot deep. They made it clear where the boundaries were to be located. The long-range comprehensive plan suggested George Ryder Road and Barn Hill Road. The residents, the people who were supposed to make the determination, did not expand the boundaries. The planning board, however, has expanded the district 500 feet west of George Ryder Road and 800 feet east of Barn Hill Road. There is no rhyme or reason for your boundaries. There should be some explanation or reason of how you made the decision. Also, the neighborhood north and south have been extended by several lots. Residents and the long-range comprehensive plan asked for no expansion and no new or infill construction. Your proposal allows residential uses in, quote, below ground stories as long as they meet requirements for natural light and egress, end quote. We believe that such intensity of use is out of character for Chatham. We should do better and provide safe, secure, decent housing that allows personal dignity and self-respect. And we hope this footnote in the use table is removed. It was only recently that town meeting changed the flexible development overlay in West Chatham because the density it allowed was not appropriate. In its Route 28 visioning report, the Cape Cod Commission stated that there was little to no support for the density such zoning allowed. This is important. It allowed 4 dwelling units, 8 bedrooms per acre for so-called multiple housing, and 12 dwelling units, 24 bedrooms for congregate residential facilities. Town meeting voted in 2015 and again in 2016 to eliminate such development as contrary to the goals and policies of the comprehensive long-range plan. What you are offering is essentially the same, actually worse, because you are suggesting a minimum of 8 units per acre and a maximum of 12 units per acre with no limit on the bedrooms. It seems like we're moving backwards. Let us present our bottom line. There is a lot going on with new focus on affordable housing, attainable housing, workforce housing, year-round rental requirements, short-term rentals, and various water studies, as well as the concern about the need for more wells. Here it is the end of March, and we are still under very strict water use regulations. There is an adequate amount of water in the lens, but Chatham's wells are unable to pump a sufficient quantity during peak times. And how many bedrooms will you be adding? There are also airport issues, FAA issues about which town council could not have been more firm, and your own chairman telling you that the FAA advised her personally that there is to be no new development in the RPZ. That's just a few of the related issues. We ask that you remove all mention of the long-range comprehensive plan from your proposal. Present this as your document. We hope that you adhere to the boundaries the residents requested. We are not asking you to change your mind about what you want, although we do not believe these dramatic zoning changes are in the best interest of Chatham or West Chatham. But if that is what you want, be upfront and say that this is what you want and think is best for the town. And thank you for hearing our statement. And this is from the West Chatham Association Incorporated Board of Directors. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Gloria. Any other public comments? I don't see any hands raised. Any other public comments? I don't see any. So we do appreciate everyone who's participated, and thank you again, all of you, for your comments. Certainly will, as we move forward on this plan, we'll take all the points you've made under consideration and take a look at the points that you've brought up. If there's no other comments, we'll move to the next item on our agenda. As you know, each year we reorganize the board and we choose chair and vice chair and clerk. And most recently, it's been actually for a long time, it's been our tradition that one of the newer planning board members should be clerk. Most recently, Roger Griffin was our clerk, but he has stepped down from the board. So right now, the position of clerk is open. So we wanted to have a selection tonight for the planning board clerk. Charlene has actually volunteered.
I would be happy to assist in that function.
Yes.
Well, you have to do it anyway because Megan did this.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah.
We usually do this by formal vote. Charlene's volunteered, so I will nominate Charlene, and we have a second to the
I'll
nomination.
second it.
All right, and yes,
Can I ask that we get all three nominations, make one motion and vote on all three at the same time?
Well, we'll do that, and,
all three nominations for,
no, we still have a chair and a vice chair. We
Yeah,
Yes,
don't have a
and-
clerk.
Right, so, you guys aren't stepping down, we're just getting a clerk.
we're just getting a clerk, yes.
Trying to do, I just wanted one vote for all the new open positions.
No, we'll do that again in July.
It is going to be one vote for all that are available.
I
Yes,
apologize.
yes, it's just because clerk is vacant because Roger has stepped down from the board. So we're just voting for clerk tonight to fill that position. In July, again, we'll reconsider.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, so there is a nomination for Charlene on the floor. May I have a second?
I seconded already.
Great. So, sorry, I didn't hear you. Thank you.
Bob Wirtschafter, approve.
Arthur,
Art Sprue, approve.
Warren,
Warren Chain, approve.
Megan,
Megan Story, approve.
and Charlene.
I abstain.
Okay, great. And Bob Dubus.
Bob Dubus, let me think for a minute. No, I approve.
And this is Catherine. I also approve. Thank you so much for volunteering, Charlene. And it's, you know that it's great to have you on board. And we really appreciate that. So that being said, Chairman's comments is next. I have no comments. We're scheduled for our next working session on West Chatham Neighborhood Center for May 22nd. So we'll continue with the open issues on West Chatham Neighborhood Center. And with that being said, if there's no other comments from the board or from the public, may I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I move we adjourn the meeting.
May I have a second to that motion?
I second it.
Bob Wirtschafter, approve.
And Arthur?
Art Sprue, approve.
Warren?
Warren Chain, approve.
Megan?
Megan Story, approve.
Charlene?
Charlene Greenhouse, approve.
And Bob Dubus?
Bob Dubus, approve.
And this is Catherine Halpern. I approve that we adjourn tonight's meeting. Let's note the time as 7:12. And thank you, everyone, for your participation, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
That's my bid.